draft class, I was telling my friend, I think this is the best defensive draft class I've seen in a while. And then
The
I think the
only
wide receiver has good depth, and then that's about
Yeah.
it.
the only reason I don't like the class is because everyone's like, I still see so many people like, oh, there shouldn't be any quarterbacks taken in the first round. It's like, well, what are you gonna take? Like edge six, like in a not great class? Like, congrats, like you got edge six, like you're better now. Go win, hang a banner.
Welcome to another episode of Boom or Bust, the draft show. Max Chadwick alongside Nick Merriam and Donny Clemons, the big one, guys. The guy who's probably going to be the first overall pick. I think he's the betting favorite right now to be the first pick in the draft. Michigan edge, Aidan Hutchinson. Going to do a scouting report on him, go over his strengths, weaknesses, player comp, ranking on our board, team fit, so much more. Before we start the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to follow our Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Boom or Bust Draft. You know, Donnie at Pick and Spreads on TikTok. Well, he's posting the Boom or Bust TikTok right now, too. So make sure you follow that. Obviously, at YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast, please rate and subscribe to the channel. Leave comments below because we've seen a lot of comments for, you know, who you want to see next. So Garrett Wilson, a lot of Tyler Linderbaum, which might be Donnie's burner accounts, just commenting Tyler Linderbaum on every single video. We don't know, but we'll see. We're going to get to a lot of more top prospects soon, hopefully, and check out the merch store below. So let's go over Aidan Hutchinson. He's a senior, 6'6", 265 pounds, former 4-star recruit, number 112 overall, and the number 12 edge in the class of 2018 coming out of Michigan. In 14 games this year, he had 14 sacks, 16.5 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles. And in his career, he had 17.5 sacks, 27.5 tackles for loss, and 5 forced fumbles. And as a defensive end, finished second in the Heisman Trophy voting to Bryce Young, which you know how hard it is to get even a finalist for a defensive player. He finished second in the Heisman Trophy, and for my money, should have won the Heisman. But Nick, what do you love about Aidan Hutchinson?
Well, it's the production this year, right? Coming off of an injury, he had a tough broken foot injury last year that it looked like he was going to be a high second rounder, maybe working his way into the first. Really good start off to the year. I mean, Kwity Paye had a great game against Minnesota. Kwity Paye goes on to be a high pick, has a good rookie year. Aidan Hutchinson breaks his foot in the next game. He comes around this year. We talk about him in preseason. We're like, oh, he's probably still in the same range. And then he blows up in a year where, we don't really see a lot of guys blowing up, having their best seasons. A guy who's played relatively well, consistently been above average as a prospect, and another year more experience in college, plays his best football, and ultimately is the biggest reason probably why Michigan makes their way into the playoff this year. It finally breaks through, is that dominant pass rush. Now, he had Ajabo on the other side helping him out, but he was the leading force pressures wise, sacking the quarterback for that defense, and was their best player on both sides of the ball. And he put a little bit of everything together. I think prior to this, he was kind of just a twitchy guy who you saw like on tape looked like a guy who was maybe a little more developed than most college edge players. And although he was a good athlete, he hadn't really put it all together. This year, with those pass rush moves, he's starting to figure it out. He finally put it all together. I think he really learned how to turn the corner. We talked about this with George Karlaftis. I think Aidan Hutchinson was also a guy who had a little trouble with bend and actually kind of figured it out this year, and that's difficult to do. And I think that the reason he was able to do it is, again, he's a smaller guy. He always had the speed and the quickness to make it work. And ultimately, I think his ability to become a more aggressive pass rusher, attack upfield more, lean into tackles, get better disengaging, led to him being a very dominant player. And I think you see a little bit of everything. There's the power moves, there's the bend moves, there's quickness, there's the twitchiness, there's the suddenness to disengage. One of the best disengaging edge players I've seen. And there's enough different things that he's good at. I don't really know if he's like elite in one thing, but he's just good at all these little things that it accumulates into this prospect that to me feels like he has an extremely high floor as a pass rusher going into the NFL.
So, I mean, yeah, like Nick said, this guy's good at everything he does. I mentioned in the Karlaftis video how Karlaftis, he doesn't win off his speed and his athleticism. Most of the time, he kind of wins off that strength and that hand placement and sometimes his technique. And then Kayvon's the other way. He'll win with his bend, his get off, his speed. Hutchinson wins off both. And I think he's the only edge rusher in this class who can win on both at even just an average level. I mean, what can't this guy do? He's an amazing run defender. He was the best pass rusher in the country. Yes, better than Will Anderson. Watch the tape. It's not even close. It's not close. It wasn't close.
Let's go.
So Hutchinson was the best player in college football this year. The fat Jordan Davis won that award over him, which is not going to mention that because it was a joke and it was stupid. And
we'll get into that later on. We'll get into that.
Jordan Davis, first overall pick.
Yep.
Aidan Hutchinson is just everything you want in an edge rusher. He has the athleticism, he has the size, he has the speed, the strength. Everything you want in an edge rusher, Aidan Hutchinson has, and he produced like it this year. So when you have the traits, when you have the athleticism and the production, there's no reason at all that this guy should not be a top 2 pick.
Exactly. Like you guys mentioned, I mean, there's just everything you could want in the position. Like he's 2 inches taller than the average edge, average weight, really good length. One of the biggest freak athletes, like you guys mentioned, in this class, number 2 on Bruce Feldman's freaks list, only behind Evan Neal, the tackle from Alabama, who we will get to soon because he's another guy who should be a top pick in this draft. And, we mentioned, he's very athletic. Well, here's some numbers that just proves how crazy athletic he is. So in the offseason, ran a 6.54 3-cone, which is faster than anybody in the 2020 Combine. Also, the average for an edge, 7.24, 7/10 longer than that. Vertical, 36 inches, average 33. 4.64 40, average 4.82. 4.07 shuttle, average is 4.43. And the best defensive player in college football this year. So not only is this guy just a superstar athlete, he put it together, man, and he was unblockable. He actually dropped a lot of weight to become this like stand-up edge for Michigan, and it worked wonders. I mean, he used to be like this, put his hand in the dirt edge. He was 280 pounds as a sophomore. He's 265 now as a senior. Looks so much more explosive this season. His hands are fantastic. Never really lets offensive linemen get into his chest. He swats them away really well, beats O linemen immediately. And his get off, like Donnie mentioned, is unreal. Gets in the backfield almost immediately as well. And again, one of the best run defenders in this class. We keep mentioning how valuable he is as a pass rusher because obviously it's the most valuable part of an edge defender. But you got to mention, like, this guy is probably the best run defending edge in this entire class as well. And he makes more stops than everyone while also remaining a very good tackler. So you mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau makes a lot of stops, not a very good tackler. George Karlaftis is, a good tackler, but doesn't really make a lot of stops, or not a great tackler. But Aidan Hutchinson is more of a guy who just is an awesome tackler, and he makes a ton of plays in the run game, which you combine that together and you get one of the best run defenders in this draft and in the country. Relentless motor. I mean, this guy just never stops. He's almost like he's angry that offensive linemen are even attempting to block him. You saw that play against Ohio State where he literally was like pointing to the guy. He's like, I'm going to run you over. And he bull rushed him and literally ran him over on his way to a pressure. Speaking of that Ohio State game, he broke a PFF college record with 15 pressures in one game against Ohio State in what was the biggest game of the year. One of the biggest games of the year. So you can mention that Georgia game, which I don't even think he was that bad. They just were really game planned for him really well. That Ohio State game, he showed up, man, and he proved why he should have been a Heisman winner, Heisman finalist, definitely. And like I said, beat you with speed, power, finesse, flexibility is nothing he can't do.
And by the way, real quick, he did this against a potential second-round pick tackle who could have been a first-round pick until Aidan Hutchinson went against him and then ruined his first-round hopes.
Yes.
So that's
another
impressive.
thing. He's an offensive tackle prospect. Like, he has a graveyard in his backyard because Jackson Kirkland was maybe OT2 in this draft. Jackson Kirkland's like a day 2 pick now because Aidan Hutchinson destroyed him. Nicholas Petit-Frere, Donnie, you mentioned him too, destroyed. And now he's a second-round pick. Like, Aidan Hutchinson, if you're an offensive tackle, you're going up against him, you might want to opt out of that game. Like, if Nicholas Petit-Frere opted out, maybe he's still a first-round pick. Who knows? If Jackson Kirkland opted out, maybe he's still a first-round pick. But Donnie, this for me was one of the hardest things to come up with. What are the weaknesses that you see with Aidan Hutchinson?
Well, I mean, there's 2 different questions you can ask me. What do I see? Absolutely nothing. I see no weaknesses with Aidan Hutchinson. Now, just for the joke of it, I'm just going to say a weakness is he goes to Michigan because Michigan is a bad school. So
it's an Iowa fan, Donnie, right there. Penn State fan me also agrees with that.
So does Tate probably somewhere.
Okay, but if we're being for real, there's no weakness on tape. There's just some prospects, and it's very rare. There's just some prospects that I have to, whenever, and you guys know this as well, whenever you watch the tape, the weaknesses find you. Like, you're watching and be like, oh, okay, the weakness. There's some prospects that I have seen throughout my 5-6 years of scouting where I have to try and deep dive through games and games just to find one small weakness. I couldn't find one with this guy. And I know I said earlier, Kyle Hamilton doesn't really have any big weaknesses. I think Kyle Hamilton's run defense can be a weakness, and maybe he might not be a great free safety, but other than that, like, I don't know if there is a true weakness with Aidan Hutchinson, because he's the good of, if you combine the good of Karlaftis and the good of Kayvon, that's what Hutchinson is. He's the good of both of them, and there's no other way around it. Like, if I want to nitpick something, he had a fractured leg in 2020, so maybe you can say injuries, but he lost weight. I'm not that concerned about it. It was a freak accident. It's not like he had long-term effect, or it's not like he had issues with this previously. There is no true weakness with this guy. Like, people are saying, like last year, there's no true weakness with Kyle Pitts. Maybe you can say his blocking, or maybe like there's no true weakness with Penei Sewell. Maybe you can say every now and then a power rusher would get him. There's no true weakness with this guy. And after watching, I went through 6 games of this guy and I couldn't find one. I couldn't find one. This guy's either getting double team or he's winning, and there's just nothing else to say about it. So I guess if I have to say something, he has injuries, but let's be real. It's the fact that he goes to Michigan.
Decision making.
Decision making indeed. And the thing about a foot injury is, unless you have like a weight issue, and no one's gonna say Aidan Hutchinson because he doesn't have a weight issue. So
he dropped weight.
He dropped weight.
Yeah,
right? This isn't a 400-pound defensive tackle. He's not somebody with like weight issues. So that's the only time the foot thing would ever be concerning, because it's not that. I wouldn't think it's a repeat injury in the future. No one really has like chronic foot problems unless it's a weight thing. All right. I did not watch 6 games. I watched 3. So maybe I'm going to come off as not as informed as Donnie here, but I was able to find some things I didn't love. And one thing you mentioned is the double teams he doesn't really do as well against. And part of it is that I think his best moves as a pass rusher is when he's attacking the outside shoulder of tackles. I think he's really good when he's leveraging his ability to speed around the edge, get some bend, maybe counter with a punch move, maybe disengage inside. But when he tries to go inside, he gets held up a lot. I think he does struggle at times with being overpowered by bigger offensive linemen when he tries to attack the inside shoulder. So that's something that he might have to work on at the next level of the NFL. Maybe he plays to the outside a little bit more. And the one other thing is that he is more twitchy and kind of quick with his upper body than he is kind of fast in space, in my opinion. And I think that leads to him kind of overcommitting at times. And at times, I know he has a high motor, so he tries to make his way back into plays. But you'll see him, rush up field. There'll be a run play. He'll have to come back, make a tackle. Might have been a 3-yard gain instead of a 1-yard gain. And that's not anything bad, but it's a little bit of sporadicness to his game, and because he's like that, there are some plays that are like, holy crap, like that's just wild what he did there. And there are times where he does take himself out of the play. But this is something we have said often about good defensive ends in the past. And it really is only something that comes up when you have a guy who is athletic as he is not at a point where he's completely in control of that athleticism, which is, again, something that can develop at this point. I don't know if it's there exactly right now. We'll talk about where his placement on development curve is in the bottom line section. But I think there is a little bit to his game that's still not quite there. He hasn't peaked as a player yet.
Yeah. Yeah, like for you guys watched some games this year. Like I tried to watch as much as I could this year, and like I came up with the same thing with Donnie. Like I was having difficulty. So really, if you poke any major holes in his 2021 tape, like you're nitpicking, man. So I went back to his 2020 tape and 2019 tape because he only played a few games in 2020. But before this year, I will say he was an outstanding run defender who left a lot to be desired as a pass rusher. Before this year, obviously this year was just unfreaking believable. That obviously changed, but only, as a run defender, he was fantastic. He's always been this unbelievable run defender. And I think Michigan did a really good job, as Nick said, of just putting him more on the edge because he played a lot more like a 3-4 defensive end for them before when he weighed more at 280 pounds. And then he dropped down to 265 at 6'6" and became this unbelievable athlete and looks so explosive where you didn't really see it on tape before. He only played 3 games last year before going down. I think he broke his ankle was what I saw the article saying, but got surgery on that. And then the other thing that I think I'm not worried about at all, but this is something that people are going to bring up a lot when you're comparing, because the big question in this draft is Aidan Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, who's going to be the number 1 overall pick. And I think proponents of Kayvon Thibodeau are going to say you can argue that he has the higher ceiling just because he is not developed. Where I think Aidan Hutchinson is way more developed player than Aidan Hutchinson is, and also Aidan Hutchinson a year older than Kayvon Thibodeau. So you can argue that Aidan Hutchinson has this really super, super high floor where I think at worst he's still a very, very good edge defender. Whereas Kayvon Thibodeau is, maybe could have a higher ceiling just because we don't know what he looks like when he's fully developed. But Nick, what do you think overall about Aidan Hutchinson, where he ranks for you, player, comp, team fit? What's the bottom line of Aidan Hutchinson?
Yeah, so number one player, number one edge player. We talked about this in the past. He's, I think, number one for all of us. The season that he had this year, the experience he's had in college, and just the production-wise, what he's shown has added up to that. And he should be, I think, if you're Jacksonville and you're not able to find a way to trade out, and what is a relatively weak draft class, I'll come out and say it. So I think they really shouldn't be picking number one if they have all these holes on their roster. He should be your pick because I don't think Levon Chason is really doing much for them. And maybe they try and move him to linebacker. They would be much better off putting Aidan Hutchinson and Josh Allen on the same defensive line, have a pocket pusher and a speed guy. They could actually have a pretty good pass rush next year if they decide to go in that direction. In terms of comp, I believe we've already used this guy for a video. He might have been a comp for he was on. Well, obviously we've only done George or Kayvon, so it was one of the two. It might have been Kayvon. I don't remember, but I'm gonna go with Jadeveon Clowney.
Same size for Kayvon then. Okay.
Yeah, so same size. It's funny. We were going with him twice, but I just see it on tape. Like the flashes are brilliant, and I think some of the lows are a little bit like confusing at times for him. I'm not fully sold on him as a Bosa type edge player in this draft. I think he is more in that Clowney Chubb tier of edge rushers. Now, when you put him in that tier of edge rushers, I think he's probably the best one, but I don't think he's in that Bosa, Chase Young, Myles Garrett tier as a prospect. And part of that is he's older, so he's had more time to develop. I think this is, in terms of what we've seen in offensive line talent in the Big Ten, a relatively weak year for that. So, he's not necessarily like he was throwing out tape where he would have loved to see him go against Evan Neal, and that would have been excellent, but we didn't get to see that. The Nick Petit-Frere stuff is good, but even then, I'm interested to see what happens when he first gets to the NFL. But he's a good athlete. I think the Freaks list put him as a great athlete. We get a lot of great athletes every year at edge, and I'm not certain he's in that kind of tier of just unreal, like peak athleticism for edge players. Like I think Kayvon at his peak is probably a better athlete, but we talked about it, not as developed.
Mm-hmm.
Number one player, number one edge, just like Nick, and most likely just like Max. And like I said earlier, he's better than Will Anderson. And I'm not saying that.
I think we all agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody else does.
Nobody else does.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because apparently the only thing that matters is sacks and pressures without context. But yeah, that's how TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, that's how everything works. So Will Anderson is a great player, but Aidan Hutchinson is better. Will Anderson gets a lot of free rushes, and I need to stay on topic with this. Number one player, number one edge rusher, best player in college football, should have won the Heisman. Jordan Davis is a fraud, and Aidan Hutchinson is better.
What's the player comp, Donnie? Hit me with it.
So I wanted to stay away from the classic Nick Bosa, or Joey Bosa, even though that's such a perfect comp. It's so perfect. I'm going to go with more athletic Max Crosby.
Ooh, I like that.
Max Crosby has been one of the best edge rushers in the NFL this year, which thank goodness for the Raiders, because that Cleveland Farrell pick is looking worse and worse as each year passes by. So they better be happy they got at least some type of superstar edge rusher. Max Crosby, I'm pretty sure he's top 3 in pressures, but he doesn't really get a lot of sacks, and that's fine. Pressures to me are arguably more important than sacks because you're constantly getting pressure on the quarterback. Like, yes, it's fine if you always can't bring them down, but if you're in their face, great, you're doing your job. And I think Aidan Hutchinson is going to be that player where he may not have the highest sack total right away, but he's going to get pressure in your face. So that's what I would say. Also, better pass rusher than run defender, I would say. So, yeah, Max Crosby.
I love it. So, yeah, I agree with you guys. So that tier, of the last few drafts that we've seen, that top tier of edge defenders for me has always been Myles Garrett and Chase Young. Like, I think that is very hard to get past those two. I would though. I would. I know Nick wouldn't. I would put him in that Bosa brothers.
I would too.
Maybe even Josh Allen tier. I like Josh Allen a lot coming out of Kentucky. Maybe Josh Allen's in the tier below that. Look, arguably the best player in college football this year. I think he was. Got everything you want without any glaring holes in his game. Size, length, speed, explosiveness, power, motor, production, polish. Like, he's got it all, man. The questions over his ceiling should not be a factor, because you look at Joey Bosa and Nick Bosa, that was the big question with them, because nobody could find weaknesses with those two guys. And so all they could say was they were so good in college, how much better can they get in the NFL? They're still top 5 edges in the NFL, man. So when you're that good in college, that still matters. You don't have to be this raw. Not every player has to be raw where you can be like, oh, we can get coached up and be a superstar. That's not them. Like, they were guys who were very polished coming into college, stayed that way, and were still very good athletes. And they go to the NFL and they just improve on that. And you've seen them be that good. So Aidan Hutchinson, the ceiling argument with Kayvon Thibodeau, I kind of hate, because it's kind of like, dude, look at those guys. Or you really want to take the risk with Kayvon Thibodeau? Maybe it just doesn't work out. I think it will. He'll be a very good one. But Aidan Hutchinson, I'm way more sure of than I am of Kayvon Thibodeau. Team fit, Jaguars, Lions, he's a top 2 pick. And those are the teams that are guaranteed to be top 2 in the draft. One of those two has to take him. So don't mess that up. Number 1 overall on my board, without a top quarterback, he's worth the first pick in the draft. If there was a top quarterback, obviously they would be worth the first pick in the draft. Player comp, I'm taking the easy way out. And I know Donnie and Nick both didn't want to do it. I'm going Nick Bosa, man. I think the comp to Nick Bosa I love. Both were fantastic at their schools, also supreme athletes, where I think Joey Bosa was maybe a little bit worse of an athlete than Nick Bosa, but still very good. I think that's where you're kind of seeing with Aidan Hutchinson and Nick Bosa. Very good athletes, both very, very productive. Nick didn't really have any glaring holes in his game, was so polished coming out of Ohio State, and even had some injury issues at Ohio State, which when you point to Aidan Hutchinson, it's really the only thing we would say is, oh, he missed basically a whole year with injury. Kind of happened to Nick Bosa too, and he also tore his ACL in his second year. But you look at him now, he's one of the top edge defenders in the league. I think Aidan Hutchinson could be very much like that. I think Nick is probably a better prospect overall, but I think he and Hutchinson share a lot of similarities in terms of their athleticism, in terms of how productive they were in college, how polished they were, and even for the negative, like, they do have a question mark with injury. So that's what we got on Aidan Hutchinson. Let us know if you don't think he's a top guy in this draft. All 3 of us, this is kind of a preview of the big board right now, is going to be our number 1 player on the Boomer Bust big board update. But if you think Kayvon Thibodeau's better, if you think George Karlaftis is better, or anyone else is the number 1 prospect in this draft and not Aidan Hutchinson, let us know below. Of course, please keep commenting who you want to see us do next, what kind of videos you want us to do next, and be sure to follow our Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Boomer Bust Draft. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. And that's all we got on Aidan Hutchinson. For Nick Merriam and Donny Clemons, I'm Max Chadwick. Have a great night.